Hey everyone, Maida here. Today we're diving into a serious issue: human trafficking in the United States. Human trafficking isn't just an overseas problem, it's happening right here in our backyard. We'll count down the top 20 states with the most human trafficking victims. By understanding the problem, we can raise awareness and push for change. So let's get into it. Coming in at number 20 is Kentucky, with 23.7 reported victims of human trafficking for every 100,000 people. Kentucky's location at major highways makes it a target for traffickers. Issues like poverty and drug addiction create a vulnerable population. Organizations like Catholic Charities and Kentucky Rescue and Relief combat this, but they can't do it alone. Next up is Texas, a major hub for human trafficking. Its proximity to the US-Mexico border and bustling cities make it a prime location for traffickers. The massive size of Texas makes it harder to track and prosecute trafficking cases. Groups like Children at Risk and the Texas Human Trafficking Resource Center provide support to survivors and advocate for stronger laws. Coming in at number 18 is Washington State, with 24.3 reported victims per 100,000. Washington's significant international border, both with Canada and along its coastline, contributes to its trafficking problem. Vulnerable populations, including migrant workers and homeless youth, create a perfect storm for traffickers. Organizations like Seattle Against Slavery and the Washington Anti-Trafficking Response Network, WARN, are working tirelessly to provide resources and support to survivors. Tied with Washington at number 17 is Arizona, with 24.3 victims per 100,000 people. Arizona's border with Mexico makes it a major corridor for human trafficking. The state's significant Native American population is disproportionately targeted by traffickers. Groups like the Arizona Anti-Trafficking Network and Phoenix Dream Center provide shelter, counseling, and legal aid to survivors. At number 16 we have Nebraska, with 24.9 victims per 100,000 people. Nebraska's central location makes it a crossroads for major highways which traffickers exploit. Large events attracting out-of-state visitors create opportunities for traffickers. Organizations like the Nebraska Human Trafficking Task Force and Set Me Free Project raise awareness and support survivors. Coming in at number 15 is Arkansas, with 25.4 victims per 100,000 people. Arkansas faces challenges like poverty, and its location along major transportation routes. Many victims are children trafficked for sex, often by someone they know. Organizations like the Arkansas Coalition Against Human Trafficking and the Women's Foundation of Arkansas work to protect children and support survivors. At number 14 is Delaware, with a rate of 25.5 victims per 100,000 people. Delaware's location between New York City and Washington, D.C. makes it a prime target for traffickers. The high incidence of labor trafficking, especially in agriculture and construction, and domestic work, is concerning. Organizations like the Delaware Coalition Against Human Trafficking provide legal aid, language services, and safe housing for survivors. Next up is Iowa, with 26 victims per 100,000 people. Iowa's location at the intersection of major highways makes it a prime target for traffickers. Many victims are trafficked from a young age, leading to devastating effects. Groups like Breaking Traffic and the Iowa Network Against Human Trafficking and Slavery work tirelessly to raise awareness and support survivors. At number 12, we have Michigan, with 26.4 victims per 100,000 people. Michigan's proximity to Canada and its international airports make it a prime location for trafficking. Issues like poverty, homelessness, and opioid addiction make people more vulnerable to exploitation. Organizations like Alternatives for Girls and the Michigan Abolition Project provide shelter, counseling, and job training to survivors. Coming in at number 11 is Utah, with 26.8 victims per 100,000 people. Utah's large tourist industry and events like the Sundance Film Festival can inadvertently create opportunities for traffickers. Organizations like the Utah Trafficking in Persons Task Force and the Maloof Foundation are working to combat this by providing training to businesses, raising awareness among the public, and offering support to survivors. 4. At number 10 is Oregon, with 27.8 victims per 100,000 people. Oregon's location on the I-5 corridor makes it vulnerable to labor trafficking. The state's agricultural industry often relies on undocumented workers who are vulnerable to exploitation. Groups like the Oregon Human Trafficking Task Force and Portland Police Bureau work to rescue victims and bring traffickers to justice. Coming in at number 9 is South Dakota, with 28.7 victims per 100,000 people. South Dakota's Native American population, especially on reservations, is disproportionately affected by this crime. Poverty, lack of resources, and historical trauma make these communities vulnerable. Organizations like the South Dakota Network Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault provide culturally sensitive support to Native American survivors. At number 8, we have California, with 28.9 victims per 100,000 people. California's size and location make it a prime target for human traffickers. The large, diverse population allows traffickers to blend in and exploit people. Organizations like CAST and CASE are fighting tirelessly to combat this issue. Coming in at number 7 is New Mexico, with 30.5 victims per 100,000 people. New Mexico shares a border with Mexico, making it a major corridor for human trafficking. The state also struggles with poverty, increasing vulnerability to exploitation. Organizations like the New Mexico Human Trafficking Task Force and Soaring Eagles Center support survivors and educate law enforcement and the public about trafficking signs. Tied with New Mexico at number 6 we have Florida, also with 30.5 victims per 100,000 people. Florida's warm climate and thriving tourism industry make it a destination for human traffickers. The state sees high sex trafficking, especially around major events like the Super Bowl or spring break. Organizations like the Florida Alliance to End Human Trafficking and Seal of Freedom provide shelter, counseling, and legal aid to survivors. At number 5 is Louisiana, with 31.6 victims per 100,000 people. Louisiana's Gulf Coast location, busy ports, and poverty history make it a prime target for traffickers. The state has many undocumented workers who are particularly vulnerable to exploitation. Organizations like Covenant House and the Louisiana Coalition Against Human Trafficking provide shelter, counseling, and legal aid to survivors. Coming in at number 4 is Missouri, with 32.5 victims per 100,000 people. Missouri's central location and major highways make it a transportation hub, which unfortunately also makes it a hub for human trafficking. Traffickers move victims across states, making it hard for law enforcement to track them. Organizations like MCATI and the Covering House raise awareness, provide training, and support survivors. At number 3, with 43.1 victims per 100,000 people, is Mississippi. Mississippi faces challenges like poverty, lack of resources, and a history of racial injustice, creating an environment where human trafficking thrives. The high number of trafficked children is particularly concerning. Organizations like the Mississippi Coalition Against Human Trafficking and the Center for Violence Prevention provide support for these children to heal. At number 2, with a rate of 46.6 victims per 100,000 people, is Georgia. Georgia's location and busy airport make it a prime target for traffickers. Many victims are young people lured with promises of a better life. Organizations like Street Grace and Wellspring Living provide shelter, counseling, and job training to survivors. Nevada has the highest rate of human trafficking in the U.S., with 58.5 victims per 100,000 people. The tourism industry, especially casinos and nightlife, fuels sex trafficking. A large transient population makes it harder to identify and assist victims. Organizations like Awaken and the Rape Crisis Center provide support for survivors. So there you have it, the top 20 states in the U.S. with the highest rates of human trafficking. If you found this information helpful, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Educate yourself about the signs of human trafficking, support organizations working to combat it, and most importantly, speak out against this injustice. Thank you for watching.